Welcome to the latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Training at Tokyo, Japan. And my special guest today is an old friend of mine, Frank Packard, who is the founder, I guess, president?
Founder and president of
AAA Partners Japan. Frank, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. So, Frank, you've had a long career in Japan. We're going to find out some more detail on that. So how is it that you are here in Japan running AAA Partners? How did that all happen?
Well, to start on a slightly amusing anecdote, I ended up here because I started here. I was born here. My father was in the U.S. Embassy.
That's right.
And so I grew up here. Mm-hmm. Fast forward in university, I entered thinking I was going to do something in medicine. I was interested in math, I was interested in science, but medicine wasn't for me. And I left college thinking I was going to do something in law or journalism. I thought words were for me. If I boil away my college education, the one thing I took away was learning how to write a declarative sentence. And that's why I have a career in finance. And the reason
all
is...
incredibly logical progressions.
Well, the reason is that very few people in finance can make a declarative sentence. Okay. They can't explain themselves. And if you can boil something down to 30 seconds or 3 minutes or 2 pages or 1 paragraph, if you can scale your presentation for what we now call the elevator pitch, you've got it made. Because in finance, there's so little competition. The most amusing thing for me these days is I work a lot with lawyers, and they're supposed to know words, and boy, do they not know them. They can't speak plain English.
Well, Frank, just on that, where did you go to college? Did you do it here in Japan or in the States? Or?
So I left when I was 7 and lived on the East Coast, boarding school in New England and university at Princeton.
Princeton, okay, right. Because your dad was a very famous scholar, and when I was at university, we were studying the security treaty crisis, of course, protests in Tokyo. His book was one of the key books on that. He was an assistant to Reischauer, who was then the ambassador at that time in Japan. So, he's a very famous man. You didn't think to become, thinking about your words, declarative sentences, like an academic. You never thought to become an academic like your father?
To be humble and honest, the apple fell far from the tree. He's quite multilingual. It's interesting because as a Japan specialist, he learned early on not to emphasize that he actually speaks fluent Mandarin as well.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And so he was brought here by a particular agency on the south side of the Potomac River, and he was looking at people who spoke Chinese in Japan.
Right.
But he didn't think it was a good thing in the 60s and 70s to talk about how much, and he still speaks Chinese, but he doesn't emphasize it.
Right.
I felt that he had kind of done what Packards can do in that domain, and I wanted to be liked or disliked for me and not for George.
Fair enough too. So you think about your career, you start to work out that, okay, there's an area there for you. So eventually, what degree do you graduate in then?
I graduated in history. I focused in American history. And my Australian and British friends like to tease me, Dr. Greg Story, because American history is so short. That's why you majored in it, and compared to Australian or British history.
Well, I tell you what, I did a PhD on decision-making about Sino-Japanese relations, and 2 languages involved, right? It took me 5 years. I always think to myself, if I'd done something in Australian politics, I could have knocked that baby out in 3 years, would have saved myself a lot of heartache. So yes, when you get into things like that, there is a benefit to it. So after university, you got to start your work career. What things are you looking at doing?
Well, I thought that I should continue my education and look at the 2 cultures that I didn't know most. So I had 2 job offers when I left Princeton, which were very few people know about them. I had a job offer to be a reporter at the Miami Herald because I wanted to look at Hispanic America.
Wow.
It was just after the Cuban emigration where hundreds of thousands of Cubans left for Florida.
Right.
And the other place was that I got a fellowship at the American University in Cairo, Egypt, because I thought the 2 cultures that I didn't know the most about, which are important in America, are Arabic American culture and Hispanic American culture.
So when you were growing up in Tokyo, Dad's working for Reischauer, you're living here. Were you fluent in Japanese at that point, and then you lost your Japanese back there, or you kept the Japanese going? How did that work?
Apparently I was fluent. I am told that I speak with a nice accent, and it's quite confusing for people because I can make my greetings with a nice accent, and then they tell me all sorts of secrets in Japanese, which I barely understand. It's getting much better, but I'm a constant source of amusement and embarrassment to my colleagues and wife.
There you go. So, okay, are we going the Spanish route? Are we going the Arabic route? Which route do we go eventually?
I went to Cairo.
Went to Cairo, okay.
And I lived there, and you might remember that the 1981-82 school year came right after Sadat had signed the peace treaty. I was very impressed. Unfortunately, he was killed 3 weeks after I got there, and it was really the last time that Americans could be in the Middle East.
I think he was at a military parade, and his own soldiers opened up on him.
That's correct. Remember, right? Very good memory. Yes.
Yeah, that was shocking at the time, right?
He thought that they were standing up to salute him, and so he stood up, and everyone else in the stand, including his successor, Mr. Mubarak, dove under the seats. So he was killed saluting his own soldiers by a guy who jumped off the back of a Jeep and ran toward him.
Wow! And
it's the way the more things change, the more things stay the same. The head of that event is Ayman Zawahiri, now the head of Al Qaeda. Oh. He was an Egyptian doctor. So I lived in Egypt until June of 1982, and I left the day Israel invaded Lebanon.
Right.
And what I took away from that was that I learned a lot about myself living outside of America, and I wanted a career outside of America. Okay. And I didn't know that there were so many people in the oil business or expat business. It was my first time to live as an expat, as an adult.
Right.
And I sought jobs that would take me overseas.
Okay, so what's the next step then to get overseas?
Go back to Manhattan at the end of the fellowship and start thinking about law and international law. And I didn't speak good Arabic or good Spanish or good Japanese. So they said, well, Wall Street seems to be expanding. So if you had a pulse and a college degree in Manhattan, you could get a job. And there were a lot of people that only had those two qualifications. But the most important thing was that there was very few barriers to entry, and there was very few barriers to promotion. So I don't have your great education or my father's education or an MBA. So you started at the very bottom. You carried people's bags to meetings. You copied, you printed, you did stuff. You built financial models. And that allowed me from the very bottom up to grow the business. And these days I meet MBAs who say, oh, I won't do that.
Okay, that's below me.
Who are overly credentialed.
Okay.
And I think it's very important to get to some of our other topics, because if you've done everything that you know about how to write, how to present it, how to lay it out, you can be a good coach to particularly a young Japanese, as opposed to getting into the building on the 10th floor. You've come in on the lobby level and gone up.
So who did you work for in New York?
I worked for Paine Webber, which had a branch in Tokyo, and they wanted to send people here, and I was not senior enough to go, but nobody else would go.
Oh, and Japan was not an attractive destination.
New York's the center of the universe.
So what year are we talking about now?
1986.
So the boom is about to take off with the bubble economy, right?
Right.
Plaza Accord 85. The regulations kicked in around about 86.
Yeah.
So did you arrive in 86?
I arrived in 86.
Oh my God, what a fantastic piece of timing that was.
It was, and even more important was that I met a young lawyer who we now joke about, but his name is Chris Wells. He's a good friend of yours and mine. We're both members of the same club with you. And in those days, we were doing Japanese leverage leases. We were doing aircraft financing. And investment banks used to buy and sell aircraft. And I came to sign a deal. And we joked today that the deal went through both of our minds without either of us understanding it. He was a young associate at Anderson, Morey, and Rabinowitz. And now I'm still working with him, and we're both in private equity funds and placement, and he's still active here.
All right. And so you're sent to Japan, so you come in as an expat.
I come in as an expat, and I don't think it was special for me. I think it was special for the times. I started on Wall Street in 1984 as an analyst. And in 1987, I was a vice president in Tokyo.
Wow.
And so I went through the analyst levels, the associate levels, 8 months to 12 months at a time. And I said, if you want to send me to Tokyo, make me a vice president. And they were upset. And I said, you don't have anybody else who wants to go to Tokyo. So they made me a vice president and sent me out here.
And was that because you understood that in Japan that business card rank is a very important door opener? Or is that just, I'll start at the top and work my way up mentality? What was that?
A bit of both. A bit of both. I think that these days you have 2 years in an analyst program, 2 years as an MBA, maybe 4 years as an associate before you get to become vice president. But I think I was representative of a whole cohort that came in, and if you worked hard and produced and you found the right mentors. So I view it as very much like the old medieval guild. You learned by doing. You learned from masters.
Right, right. And so did they have a big operation in Tokyo here at that time?
They did not. And they could barely figure out how to pay me. They were a stockbroker house, as you might remember, and they basically sold U.S. equities and U.S. treasuries. And we were sent out, 3 of us, to set up a corporate finance program. And we thought that it was pretty boring, so we went to a very exciting place called Drexel Burnham. And I was there until that blew up. But it was very exciting. And it was from there that I learned about tax leasing. And then I went to, my first management job was running a team at Bankers Trust in Tokyo. Okay. So I was running a team, I was brought in. And this is something that often happens. You bring in a middle-level gaijin to fix something, meaning that the Japanese and American bosses who hired you are too weak to fire somebody. So the new person comes in, and the first thing you're told is you have to go fire Greg, whether a gaijin or whatever. Yeah. And that was sort of the end of the bubble. So mostly Drexel and Bankers Trust.
So what was that first experience like? So you'd been an operative, to use that term, in the sense of you're working, you're producing, and now, okay, vice president, but actually now it's vice president, but then you shift to a company where you're actually leading a team. How big was the team? And what was that first experience like, leading a team? I presume they were mostly Japanese or a mixture, or?
They were half Japanese and half foreign.
Okay. So.
In those days, leaders had an office by the window, and their team sat outside.
That's right.
And what I did was to invert things, which made people a bit uncomfortable. I sat with them, and I took down all the barriers. So we sat 4 desks together facing each other.
All right.
And my office was for people's private calls.
Right. Why did you do that?
Because we could all see each other and we could all support each other. Mm-hmm. So someone's on a telephone call and another call comes in for him, but because we all know each other's conversations, and we didn't have mobile telephones in those days, so if you wanted to make a private call, you could just go into the office.
Mm-hmm. So that upsets the apple cart in terms of tradition, hierarchy, culture. So that was a pretty bold move, actually. It sounds simple, but it's a bold thing in the Japanese sense.
It was bold, but it wasn't because, well, the reason that I joined Bankers Trust was because of the very dynamic branch manager who did the same thing.
Oh, okay.
And he had sat right in the middle of the trading floor, completely tossed up everything. He had the corner office with the couch and the big desk.
Yeah.
And I was just modeling on him.
Okay.
And so if he was going to do it, I was going to do it as well.
Right.
And so he was quite an innovator who really broke down barriers. And he used to say, it's not Japanese, it's not American, it's some third species.
So in fact, that open plan concept is pretty much a given today. We're open plan, we're at home today, but in normal times, open plan has become a thing rather than the petitions, rather than the offices. So this is way ahead of the curve in that sense, isn't it? So what was that like in terms of, what were some of the challenges you found, your first leadership role? Okay, you're sitting with a team. What were the other things which were a bit challenging for you?
One was getting beneath the veneer. The Japanese have been very good at marketing themselves as cold waishatsu, white shirts. You and I are both wearing white shirts today. And so that they are not sensual, that they are not emotional. And when you actually think about it, they're very emotional and very sensual. And when I came from New York in the mid-1980s, I had a shock when I realized that actually the herd mentality is much more prevalent in Americans who are all wearing jeans and dressed the same way and look the same.
Yeah.
But the Japanese are very different. They have different hobbies. And I think the biggest challenge was getting behind the image of monolith Japan.
Okay.
And I've gone and lived in Hong Kong, where ethnically they look much more the same. And there's a lot of ethnic differentiation. People who are as dark as Barack Obama and as white as Margaret Thatcher are here in Japan, and they're all Japanese. And I think that there is this, it's less prevalent today, but it's easy to get sucked into this image of, we used to hear a lot, or I did, maybe you did too, ware ware Nihonjin, we Japanese. I've never heard French people or Texans or Australians say, we Australians think this way. And so I think that's a big difference. Americans, when we meet, I know you're Australian, but you spent time around Americans, we assume you're strange and I'm strange, and we look to narrow the difference.
Yep.
Where did you go to school?
Yep.
Do we have any friends in common?
There's commonalities, yeah.
I find the Japanese opposite. I couldn't possibly talk to him. He's a Waseda man, I'm a Keio man. He's from Kansai, I'm from Kanto. And you even get to the point where two people from Tohoku, and the guy will say, I'm from Sendai, he's from Akita. But if you're from America, Sendai and Akita are kind of close to each other. But I think that's very important to recognize, to get to your question, the individuality of Japanese. They want to be recognized as individuals.
And so once you started to understand that, what did you do about it?
It's hard. I found it harder in Japan to have the non-work conversation because you want to respect people's privacy here. And you want to, but you also want to have a relationship beyond, where's the Excel spreadsheet you promised me? And so knowing that Murata-san was a bass player in a rock and roll band allowed me to ask about her gigs on weekends. That allowed her to tell me that she was married to a musician. So you have to let people go at their own pace, and Americans want to know much more about people.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was growing up in Australia, the concept of the boss having a conversation about your life interests, personal activities, didn't exist. It was all very business, and private was something separate. So it was very clear delineation between the two. And then Japan, too, as you say, it's always surprising to me that someone will suddenly tell you they've gotten married. You had no idea they were engaged. You don't. This privacy, the concept of what's my world, my private life, is kept very, very quiet, even amongst their colleagues. They don't share it with their colleagues either. It's not like, oh, you're the gaijin, you're the boss, I'm not going to tell you. They don't tell anybody until it's a deal done. So if anything goes wrong, it's all hidden. It's all success, then they'll tell you. So it was always surprising to me. So yes, I found that too. Trying to know people beyond just their work life wasn't necessarily so easy, and there's a lot of difficulty for people to actually start sharing. Although I don't know whether younger people are a little bit different about that. What do you think? Think younger people now are a little bit different?
I think they're different for a variety of different reasons. One is that the demographics today mean that people have choices. In the 1980s, there was much more of a stratification, and there was much more pressure from the family. If you were working for a foreign bank, to go be in a startup was admitting loss. And so today, I think young people are even more challenging to manage because they have choices if they don't like what's going on. Plus, our daughter in her 20s, she went to 4 startups in 4 months. And yes, there were issues that they hadn't paid her, or they didn't do what they promised they were going to do. But this generation out of college in the last 5 to 10 years thinks nothing of having 2 or 3 positions in a year. And they don't take responsibility in that sense. Whereas I think other people are looking at, we've told our daughter, if you stay at the same thing for 3 years, you'll be in the top 2% of your class.
Yeah, really? Really?
So I think that's an issue for young people. I think young people talk much more. They have personal brands today, and this is just globally. Millennials have personal brands, and you need, I found a convenient topic to talk with our office manager who's less than maybe 15 years or less than, younger than me. She blogs about food. Right. She and her husband don't have children, but they do rescue animals. They go and rescue cats, and they take very good care of older animals. And which leads to very funny times during coronavirus. Excuse me, the cat's on the keyboard. The cats want the attention. Yeah, cat's annoying me because I'm not giving enough attention. Yeah. So coming back to that challenge of working, you've got a mixed team. Was that presenting its own difficulties too? Because you've got a bunch of foreigners who've got different expectations, different cultural background, linguistic skills. You've got Japanese who obviously choose to be in that environment. If they don't like that, they're not going to join that company. So how did you go about getting the team to work well together? How did you go about working well with the team? Listening is a very important part of any business culture, but it's particularly challenging for Americans. And I want to use an extended metaphor here to think about which sports Americans like and which sports Japanese like, because I think it sets the rhythm and cadence in Japanese society. We like to play against the clock in America with the buzzer-beating basketball shot. We announce last minute of play in the ice hockey period or last minute of play. The music starts, it gets you going. Can they beat it? And how many games do we see the headlines are about the high school or just winning in the last minute? The 2-minute drill in football. That's very American, and Americans don't realize that it's not global. What do Japanese like? Sumo, tennis, baseball. None of them are played against the clock. Golf. It takes time. It's, you know, they turn it in their own way. And I think that the Japanese don't feel a pressure to make time. And even the epitome of this was, as you know, in finance, you can have a right to exit an underwriting commitment for a MAC clause, a material adverse change, MAC. And an Austrian friend of mine in the 1980s had to go tell the president of the company that they were going to pull the warrants deal. It was a really hot deal. And as it happened, the credenza behind the president of the company had a clock on it. And he informed the president. And the man scowled at him for 5 minutes without saying anything. I've never experienced that. But there are long pauses. Whereas in America, we think a pause means I've insulted you, or I've said something stupid, or the meeting's about to end.
Or we've got a problem because we're not communicating.
And Americans are very vulnerable to rushing in and digging the hole deeper. And the first rule when you find yourself in a hole is to stop digging. But Americans are very good at digging the hole deeper. And that is something that, even with 35 years of business experience in and out of Japan, is just something you just have to sit on your hands. And it doesn't get any, I don't have any good solutions for it except to say it's like working out. You know, you just have to grim and bear it.
So how long were you in that role of leadership? This is Drexel, right?
Yeah, so Drexel was 2 years. 2 years
in
Tokyo.
What happens after Drexel?
I was sent to, so Drexel went under in February 1990. This was 8 months after Tiananmen Square.
Okay.
And so in 1992, Hong Kong had started to recover, and so had the rest of Asia. So Hong Kong started to become a real international financial center. And so I was part of a number of people leaving Japan as there was less activity here to move to Hong Kong, and doing Asian airline financing and project financing. There was a big build-out.
This is for who?
For Bankers Trust.
Bankers Trust, okay, right.
But Bankers Trust was taking a left turn all into derivatives. And I remember feeling very uncomfortable when the president of the company said, our products are so good they sell themselves. If you're a client-facing salesman, that doesn't feel so good in terms of job tenure. So I took my deals and went to a small bank on the West Coast called Bank of America. It's not as big and famous as it is. It was a small Asia-Pacific bank.
Was it? Okay.
Many people don't remember, but in the early 1900s, it was founded as the Bank of Italy by an Italian immigrant. It was supposed to be for immigrants that couldn't get banking services in Italy, so a guy named Giannini. And naturally, as it expanded, it had a large European footprint. But in the 1980s, they had a lot of difficulty. They had a lot of real estate exposure. And they made a bet. They sold Europe and bet everything on Asia Pacific. They had a branch in London, but that was it for Europe. And they bet everything. So it was really a place for me, an Asia Pacific facing bank.
So how long this is in Hong Kong? For how many years were you there?
I was there for 6 years. I ended up running project finance for all of Asia Pacific.
So you're running a team there, obviously, of Hong Kongese, I guess?
Hong Kong Chinese, but also British people, Australians.
So what was that like? You've got a mixed team in Tokyo. Now you're in Hong Kong, mixed team there. What were the sort of contrasts between leading in the other?
Well, there was a lot of sharp elbows and sharp shoulders between the Americans and the British and the Australians. One of Australia's great exports, of which you are a good example, is very smart, bright people that find their careers outside of Australia. And in Hong Kong, that was true. There was an overlay of interesting nationalism. And so I had to learn about ABC and BBC and CBC, which may not be front of mind for you, but they were insults among Hong Kong Chinese. Are you American-born Chinese, Canadian-born Chinese, or British-born Chinese? And the Hong Kong people were a little bit nervous about, are they really Chinese? And so I was there for 5 years before the return. If you are politically correct, it's not the handover, it's the return. And in some ways, the ultimate project financing is Hong Kong. It was build, operate, and transfer back. And so it was natural that Gordon Wu and a lot of Hong Kong entrepreneurs were very good at these public-private partnerships, and that's what we were really financing. The Chinese, over time, became extremely nationalistic. Why are you here? why do I have a Gaijin or Guilo boss?
Yeah.
And there was a famous incident where some Hong Kong Chinese people took boats to what the Chinese called the Diaoyutai in 95, 96. An activist threw himself off the boat, and he didn't know how to swim. And he was going to swim and be the first Chinese to land on what the Japanese called the Sengaku. And he died in the arms of a Japanese Coast Guard man who dove in to save him. And they were trying to show that they were more Chinese than the mainland Chinese, because the mainland Chinese weren't going to deal with it. And so there was an overlay of nationalism. I remember interviewing somebody who very proudly talked about the Chinese storming of the U.S. consulate in Shanghai. And I said, you're applying to the Bank of America. And he said, but we got them. And we showed Chinese. So there was this tension around the handover, around the return in 1997. And I think a lot of British and a lot of American people that are just doing local financing have left Hong Kong since then. We left in 2004.
Okay, so back to America,
Tokyo,
back to Japan?
Back to Tokyo, yeah.
Back to Tokyo, right?
Yeah.
So when you come back, what are you doing back in Tokyo at that time?
I had, in project finance, a number of great Australian firms, Lend-Lease, Babcock & Brown, Macquarie Bank.
Mm-hmm.
We thought we were pretty smart at Bank of America, but we only got one fee when we did a deal. Mm-hmm. And these guys, they were doing something called infrastructure funds mm-hmm. and private equity funds, and they mm-hmm. got a fee every year mm-hmm. for just doing the same deal. Mm-hmm. That looked pretty good. Mm-hmm. So toward the end, Bank of America had dabbled in the fund business, and I don't consider myself an investment professional, but I thought that was an area of growth. So I've, for the last 17 years, have been focused on fund placement.
So is this for yourself, or you're working for someone at this stage when you come back from Hong Kong, or do you start your own firm, or the AAA?
I started a firm with another group that was, they called themselves Fintech Global International, FGI. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing international at all about them. But mm-hmm. another Gaijin and I, a fellow who was retiring from AIG, you might know him, Robert Hurst, mm-hmm. he and I jointly set up a securities company to do fund placement. And they thought that was great because they're about to have an IPO. Mm-hmm. And so we set up FGI Securities for them. We were involved in raising money in Japan for offshore hedge funds.
Okay.
And it was an interesting time because in 2004 or 5, they invented something in Japan called the FIEL, the Financial Instruments Exchange Law. Mm-hmm. Before that, funds weren't a security. Funds were kind of floating around, and we could set up Greg and Frank's Good Time Company and just go out and hang out our shingle and sell, which is what Robert and I planned to do. FGI said, that's great, we'll give you a free office. And we'll give you free IT and free real estate, and you make the rest yourself. And that sounded like a great deal. It ended up having to become a securities company, and they invented definitions like a Type 2 securities and a Type 1 securities, and they regularized things that limited partnerships and Godo Gaisha, Tokume Kumii, and TMKs. They regularized them that they're all investments, therefore they should all be regularized under the Instruments Exchange Law. FGI had an IPO. That was a very positive experience for me. Mm-hmm. And I went to HSBC, where I did virtually the same thing. HSBC wanted to sell hedge funds and private equity, and it was in Japan and Korea. Mm-hmm. And that was an eye-opener. But after
was this before HSBC tried to open a retail banking?
It was around exactly the same time.
Okay.
And it was fascinating to me, the mismanagement of that whole wealth management business.
Yeah. What was that guy's name? Francois. I met Francois. He came from Hong Kong to set that up. And I was in Shinsei at that time, right? And we had branches. We had about 40 branches in Japan at that time. And they were starting to open up these big HSBC mega branches, And I had this lunch with Francois, and I said, I think it was Francois. And I said, how are you going to make this pay? Because I knew how lean and mean our branches were, and it was hard to make them pay. And they were opening up like 30 people in a branch, big.
Nippon Yusen building right next to...
nice real estate, lots of expenses. Oh, this is never going to work. He said, oh, don't worry, the board's behind it. It's a big push. We're going to back this. And I thought, okay, this is going to end in tears for sure. And it did. But anyway.
They were incredibly cheap, and they didn't realize if you're going to have wealth management and you're going to go for the... not the mega rich, but the very comfortably rich people. In those days, I belonged to the Tokyo Lawn Tennis Club, as did the country manager and maybe 5 other senior people. And one of the things about wealthy people in Japan, their target market is they all belong to clubs with direct pay. You and I belong to the same club, which has direct pay. And in order to be a member of the direct pay system, you have to pay like a $5 million deposit. And HSBC wouldn't. So the 5 of us had to pay using another bank account, although we worked for a bank with a branch in Japan. Our own banking account would not pay. And we were the segment that they would like to sell wealth management services to. So I think that they were too cheap and not willing to understand local experiences here.
Anyway, we digress from leadership.
Yes.
Let me roll the conversation back to the topic here. Yeah. So you're setting up your own thing at this point? Is this what's happening?
So what happened was that HSBC came into the financial crisis in 2008, and I was a casualty of that. So a number of people laid off. Actually, some people that I had who had left HSBC just as I was joining had set up something called Asia Alternative Asset Partners, and that became AAA Partners. And they were seeding hedge funds, and they too were looking for a reboot. And they had seeded hedge funds and were marketing them. So they wanted someone in Japan because they had a very high-profile client.
So when you say a seeded hedge fund, can you explain what a seeded hedge fund is?
Sure. Seed money is the first investors that go into a hedge fund. So for some of your listeners that might not be familiar with the fund business, typically there's at least 2 legal entities. And I'll speak in a simplistic way. One is a bag of money. That's a legal entity. It could be in Cayman, could be in Delaware, could be. And the other is a separate group called the fund manager. And you put your money in the bag, and they do nice things with it, and hopefully you pour out more money from the bag than you put into the bag. And the people that put the money in first can get some very nice privileges, maybe lower fees, maybe certain privileges that will enhance the return. So wealthy people gave their money to this company, AAA Partners. They wanted a representative in Japan because we had an opportunity to work with one of the legends of Japan fund management, a man named Abe Shuhei, who had Sparks Asset Management. And my colleagues had known him for many years. They had banked him when he was at Bermuda Trust, and they had done trust work with him and administration work. And Abe-san was quite a character. The seed investors had put money into several hedge funds, and they were doing very well until 2008. And there are terms and conditions in the seed investment contract that if you lose 10 or 20%, the seed investor can take their money out or cancel the contract. So their business model, they needed a reboot. And they became what's known as a third-party placement agent. And they needed somebody who was licensed and had securities licenses. In the fund placement world, the individual has to be licensed, the company that you work for has to be licensed, and the product has to be registered according to whether it's a type 1 or type 2 security. And I had all of those experiences and skills. And so I was a salaryman for 2 years and built up AAA Partners Japan. They decided to close that in 2010, and I didn't have a plan B, so I did a management buyout and paid them for the licenses that they'd set up for me. And created AAA Partners Japan. And that's how I ended up.
So what is happening today? Do you have a big staff, a small staff? What's your size of the operation today?
We're restructuring right now. We have a very small staff. We expanded into looking at a variety of different businesses. We looked at helping a bunch of British brands that were having problems getting into the department stores here. We made a joint venture with a British group. That didn't go well. We worked as the branch of a M&A global boutique operation, boutiques in different countries, and everyone needs to have a presence in Japan, but we felt that they weren't really the right group for us. We looked at equity research. In finance, there's a lot of areas, M&A, equity research, which are in turmoil, and we thought we could give a lower cost support for that. We ended up just focusing on fund placement. And my experience at Drexel Burnham and Bankers Trust was a real winner for me that I didn't expect because they failed for a number of reasons, but compliance was among them. And I really focused on licenses from the very beginning, getting every license that I could. And people, I think, looked a little bit at me as a bit of an oddball. Why are you so focused on licenses? very primitively and crudely, if you are working for somebody who's going to receive the money, someone who's issuing paper, issuing stock, selling a fund, that's called brokerage. And you get paid by that person who receives the money. If you're working for someone who has money, generally called an investor, you get paid by them, that's called investment advisory or asset management. Because of the license setup, we were actually both an investment advisor and a broker. We were licensed to get fees from both sides.
Oh, nice.
And we really made sure, and some people were rather cavalier and casual about that. We always made sure that we had I called the theory of the fee. We only took it from one side. We didn't care, but we wanted it to be legal. And
Which is interesting because here in real estate, the real estate brokers take it from the seller, they take it from the buyer, they take it from both sides in the real estate business, which has always struck me as quite, wow, what a business. Because in Australia, it's going to be one side or the other. It's not
in most
both.
parts of the world, it's one side or the other.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting digression, but the FSA, when they were putting together the FIEL, had real problems with the Ministry of Land and Infrastructure because they liked it that way. And if you want to sell something in a GK, TK, or a local partnership format, and they say, oh, sure, you just become a securities broker, but because of MLIT, you need to also have a TACN license. And so there are a bunch of twists in the, what I call wrinkles in the universe. And we didn't care. We could stand in the middle and get paid by either side. The most stressful time for me was one time when I had broke a big piece of real estate. One investor took the entire deal, and he turned around and said, my wife doesn't speak English. I want you to be my investment advisor. And I flipped. And I called my lawyers, I called our compliance people, I called the FSA, and they said, it's fine. Just disclose it to everybody, what you're making. And so I, because of my issues, only charged what it cost to cover the legal fees to document it and charged him 25,000 yen a year.
25,000 yen?
Just to stand by, to do nothing, just in case he died, and I had to settle his wife's estate. And the deal was over in 3 years. I did no work. So he was all set up around that. Yeah.
So you've got quite a business that's quite able to morph into different areas in that finance area. So your team must have to have a great deal of flexibility to go with you on this stuff too, because you may have all the licenses, you may have this experience, but probably not too many of them have this many broad experiences.
I think that's partly true. I think one of the ways, perhaps not the only way that I've cut through it, is to have a three-word mantra, and I say it in all the meetings, what we want for ourselves and what we want for our clients. And it gave me great pleasure to see them saying it in Japanese and them taking ownership of it. And I said, we want three things. We want to only do legal business. We want to do stuff which is rewarding. It has to be a good thing for you. If we're not adding value, you can't pay. Why would you pay us? And it has to be fun. We don't deal with jerks. And I have fired clients that have been borderline racist.
And there's plenty of jerks in the finance industry.
Yeah, it does.
My chagrin.
Yeah, it is equally distributed in finance as in other areas.
So,
but it does say, you know, there are a lot of surprising brand name bulge bracket firms which will ask a boutique to do things that they won't do themselves.
All right.
And actually, the more famous the brand, the more you have to be on caution. Why are they dealing with you?
Yeah.
Why are they giving business?
Yeah. The poison chalice type of activity, is it? Yeah.
Yes, very much.
So what about the teams you've been running? Think about engagement. How did you go about getting the team engaged? And I'm thinking particularly now on your current roles, where you're doing a lot of different types of businesses, trying to find out which ones are going to work, and then you settle on one. But how do you keep people engaged as you go on this journey? One is to, in a small firm, you can't really have a training section or a coaching section or a coaching session or things, but to look at things which will show your confidence in the team. I'll give you one great example, was the woman, our office manager, who came in, and she'd had 6 years at Goldman Sachs as a sales assistant and at Credit Suisse. So she was used to finance types and the big egos and things. She always thought of herself as a secretary, sales assistant. And I said I'd like her to take the personal qualifications for selling securities, what are known as Gaimuin Nishu, Gaimuin Ishu. And this was after about 6 months in which she was doing everything well. And she said, I won't. And I said, you will. And we had a real fight about it. And I said,
I think you get away with being cute, and you're quite lazy, and you're much smarter than, I believe in you more than you believe in yourself. And I said that several times. She took the test. Of course, she passed them. And so I'd given her a portable skill. Secondly, she could go to meetings without me, because sometimes you just need a broker-dealer in the room, kind of a broker-dealer of the record. And she kept saying, but I'm not making decisions, I'm not doing policy. And she was always copying me on things. So she had, she's developed into quite a capable person when the deal's all done and you just need a salesman to go bring the documents over. And she kind of likes that. And so I think that I've given her a horizon that she can do more things. It's been interesting. One particular big area for me, which is not obvious, I'm very interested in environment and ESG. And after Fukushima, there was a lot of inbound investment into solar here. And we've been very active in that. And we have found that there are a lot of, not defective, but some deals are partly in Japanese or all in Japanese, partly in English or all in English. And because we're a bilingual team, we didn't care. And that drew a huge amount of business to us because we could handle documents, a purchase contract for power in Japanese and an investment contract in English. And so we found that you needed type 2 licenses and investment advisory. We've probably done 20 solar transactions. That was not anything that any of my team knew about, but we've learned along the way.
Okay, so is that learning process for them something that's engaging for them, or how do you keep them engaged in the business on a day-to-day basis? Well, we're not a very hierarchical team, but by teaching them these skills, and we're not a young team either, and so they have friends and former colleagues that are now dispersed into many companies, and so they would start to say, Frank, actually my friend Greg used to work for me, and so that's an important relationship in Japan. He's my ex-junior. He's now doing solar. Can we go work with him? And so I was very supportive of them moving from being my bag carrier and working for me to them launching their own deals and them bringing in business. If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. That comes from I was going to ask you about innovation here, because you mentioned that through their networks they've got contacts and they see a business opportunity and they're suggesting that to you. But do you have a process of encouraging innovation in the team so that that's not a one-off type of occurrence? It becomes sort of a regular feed of ideas or potential deals in the future or whatever. How do you think about getting innovation from the team?
One of the characteristics of the business has been that the Japanese have lots of money, low interest rates here, and they're looking for things offshore to invest in. That means that we probably get 2 to 3 inquiries a week of people saying, can you raise money? 70 to 80% of them are dismissible. You might have read about a guy called Greensill. And there's all this trade finance people coming to us.
Another dodgy Aussie.
That's redundant. But there are people coming to us with trade finance. And my Japanese colleagues who aren't reading about Greensill. Greensill's surprisingly undercovered in Japan. And I don't think any Japanese financial institutions that I'm aware of have been recorded as having any exposure. It's been Swiss, UK, and Australia, and maybe a German bank. But
it's interesting, though, because Son put a lot of money into Greensill's business,
It is, and Son is a fascinating issue. He has not invested in any Japanese companies. However, he does own 100% of WeWork Japan, which is a joint. He owns 50% directly of WeWork Japan, and WeWork Japan is very successful. And there are parts of that company's business which have engaged us, not the Vision Fund, because they just want to do asset management.
Right.
And we have ended up broking things with deals with investors that they have already engaged, and they need a broker of record. And I cannot tell you the pleasure that we had when we brought Nomura into one of their deals and they went bananas because they thought they should have been the broker of record. And because we can deal bilingually, and that team could not, because we were very orthodox about how things were done, and that large group, it's not Vision Fund, has engaged us for repeat business.
Nice.
And
so coming back to the point about innovation, though, I mean,
so I think we have this flow of deals coming in, and I would screen the ones that we would never do under any circumstances, but they're ones that I might not know how to do. I would show to the team.
Okay.
And so innovation was maybe externally stimulated.
Right.
And so people coming in, can we do this?
Okay.
I have dealt in the 1980s with Hollywood here in Japan, but I had not dealt with it recently.
Right.
And so we talked about who do we know, and do we have a way to make money. So using the topics that are coming out of the flow of ideas and business that's coming in.
So we think about, if you've got engagement, you can get innovation, because if people don't care, they don't care. Make it better, who cares, So if you've got the engagement, you get the innovation, you get the ideas. One of the things too, is very important is having that trust. You talked before about Japanese images, not emotional. In fact, they're very emotional. And this whole issue about trust is totally an emotional, subjective judgment. And once you're in, amongst the system of business in Japan, once you're in. But getting in is the tricky part, because the trust is not there. And staying in means the trust has to be kept. But what's been your experience with building trust with your team members, with people you've been leading in your previous iteration or prior iterations? What's sort of been some of the things for you that you found have been important in building trust?
I think when I came here as an American, I was potentially light with my words, and I didn't realize that people hang on your word and they can be extremely judgmental. Whereas they don't.
When you say light with your words, are you talking about sardonic humour, sarcasm, just off-the-cuff comments without particularly having any meaning attached to it? Because there's different variations of this problem. Which particular variation were you focusing on?
It's excellent. Let's break that down. Sarcasm is inappropriate in a Japanese office. It's inappropriate with non-native speakers.
Yep.
It is... what I meant by light was, I'll get back to you with that. If you don't say, I'll get back to you next week, or I'll get back to you at 5 o'clock, they might think you're going to get back in 2 minutes or 10 minutes or something.
Okay.
And so maybe the way to say that is to be precise in the expectations. That's an important topic, and I have to think about it. And I want to get back to you, but I cannot do it this week. So I wish to respect your question, and I'm going to think about it and honor it with some deep thought.
Right,
so you have to say a little bit more than you might say to an American, I'll get back to you about that.
And it's vague enough, everyone's good with it, yeah.
Yeah. I think sarcasm is really unwelcome here. People are making a really big effort to speak English. It's interesting, you made a comment earlier, which I've been reflecting on, and you were talking about, well, people are at a gaishike, they're at a foreign company for a reason, they want to be there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's always true.
Okay.
And I think that sometimes they're there because they really don't fit into a Japanese company. They are the upturned nail.
Right.
That hammers down. They're there because nobody else will hire them.
Right.
And so you have to be careful that they may not be there by choice, but they may be too opinionated. They may be too outre, out of bounds, unacceptable, and you can use that. One of my, from all the way through, from the 1980s all the way through, one of the secrets of any of the teams I've worked on is always to have strong women. always to have women, and it's been a great experience for me.
Now, why is this? Why is having strong women important?
Well, first of all, I think they're overlooked by the Japanese, and they're just as capable, if not more capable. And one of my business tricks or tricks of the trade is, as much as possible, take a woman to a meeting. And it's worked out fantastically with business meetings at the ACCJ. The financial services committees all were led by men. And we were the first financial committee to have a woman. And you can really, I think you meet a woman on the other side of the table, and first of all, the boy-girl stuff's out of the way, because I'm coming with a woman colleague, peer. Secondly, the men in the room behave themselves. Right. And they've kind of want to be admired by the woman. And I remember going to see, no one had had the idea of inviting Mr. Mizuno from GPIF, the famous CIO for 4 years. And I asked permission, and surprisingly, he would see us. And I was told by the head of Bank of New York Mellon, I'm going to go to the meeting just because I don't want you to be shocked. He'll come for 10 minutes. I know Rio, and I know him, Hiro, and I know him very well. And he'll come by himself and give you 10 minutes. He came with 4 other people, and we got into an argument, and a pleasant argument. And at one point he burst out and he said, I don't like lawyers. And I said, that's really rude. You should apologize. He's a lawyer, Mr. Hymas, and Ms. Rogers is a lawyer. I want you to apologize right now. And he did.
Oh, okay.
And we argued for 75 minutes about why he was going to talk to the ACCJ. I said, why? And I said, if you don't talk to the ACCJ, you're not talking to the international business community. And we got him. And he came. And then all the men in the ACCJ wanted to take the charge of the event. I said, no, I don't think so. We're talking about diversity. Jennifer will interview him.
Yeah.
And so I have found that Kathy Matsui likes to say that you have to ask women twice if you want to give them a promotion or give them a project, because the first time they don't believe you. Yeah. I think it's more than that. I think it's 2 or 3 times. Really? Even somebody as confident and as successful as Jennifer was, really? You want me to interview Mizuno-san? I said, yeah, he will feel comfortable. That's his, he models himself as the person to do that.
Okay, so this...
So I think having women on teams has been a success factor in all the teams, whether it's in Hong Kong or whether it's in Japan. It's the right thing to do. Why should you refuse 50% of the resources of humanity? They also see things differently. They read meetings differently. They contribute differently. And I think that's been a really important bonding thing. You make sure that they you don't allow them to serve tea. You don't allow them to have the servile note-taking role. So I have inverted things. I serve tea to my colleagues. Okay. I serve tea to my clients. Okay. She seats them and she does stuff, and I take the tea orders. Right. And just to say that we have a level playing field.
How is this taken? Because, you know, you're a foreigner, you're senior, you're taking the tea order. That's totally upside down. So, I mean, how is that interpreted? As something like, okay, we're with a very unique person here, or how liberal-minded Frank is, or how do they see that?
I'll tell you who taught me that trick.
Okay.
So, in 1987, my father was an academic. He was at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Study, and he managed to get a meeting for the 2 of us with Mike Mansfield. Right. And Mansfield did that. Yeah. Mansfield served everybody coffee himself. There were probably 10 people in the kitchen who had done everything for him. Yes. But Mansfield would leave the room, and every Japanese who'd met him told me, the ambassador served me coffee. Yeah. Can you imagine that? And he was such a legend. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for Mike Mansfield, it's good enough. And that's where I picked up the trick. Right. It's a leveling. It's not a trick. It says, we're here. Right. You're in my place. Yep.
It's humility. So, you know, if you think about leadership, we talked about a few factors of leadership and some of your experiences. Are there any things about leadership which I should have asked you, Frank, which I haven't asked?
You should have. I have found that compared to other cultures, Japan can be very factional, and people can form alliances, and there can be bullying and isolation against other people. And I'm not smart enough to see it. or it's done away from me or out of sight from me. And in the Japanese teams, I have picked someone, usually correctly, and said, you're the senior Japanese. You own the problems here. There will be no factionalism. Anyone we hire, you have the right of veto. Anyone you want to fire, we do it. You own harmony here. You must take personal responsibility for it. And you don't need to do everything in front of me, but I will come to you and blame you for any disharmony.
And is this because, as foreigners, it's difficult for us to pick up on that factionalism or the, trying to exclude people or harassment within the culture that we may not be shown it. That may be sort of, whatever in Nihonjo, keep it to ourselves over here, and we're not going to show it to anybody, or just cultural cues or linguistic cues or vibe cues. Maybe we're not reading the air, so to speak, Kuku yomenai.
I think there's a lot of kuki yomenai. I think our yumi maranai. I mean, that we can't do it. I have been frustrated that after, so we probably went through 20 people, 15 people were no longer with us. And there were some people that people said, oh, we couldn't wait for you to fire him. Oh, it's so good that you did that. But nobody gave you that feedback during the time that they were being and we have a very good team that wants to work together. And we've had a really rough pandemic. We're reorganizing ourselves. And it's been really, really great. I have had to realize that what I want is not always good for the health of the team. One unfortunate thing that I've had to learn in the pandemic is a new word for me, maybe it's a new word for you. Do you know remohara? It's a thing now that people insist that their junior women turn on the camera so they can see their bedrooms and see what they look like. It's called remote harassment. It's a play on sekuhara. And I have never seen Masayo on a video call. And I've been gone 10 weeks without seeing her in person. And I would like to see her and have the visual contact. But since I've been hearing this, she never turns it on. She wants privacy. And
why don't they use a green screen, fake background like the rest of us that's easily available on these platforms?
It's easily available. I think it's I have my rights. I have my, it's making a stand. And if you don't give them any resistance, you take away the argument. And so I asked once, what was interesting is we have a little place outside of Tokyo in Shizuoka. And for many years, we've been using Office 365. And we have backed up everything in the cloud. And I said, if I'm going to take off Mondays and Fridays, you guys should too. But they really, the team that has remained really likes seeing each other and really likes being together. So the other thing which I found was a funny way to, unintentional way to bond, you asked about team engagement, was I said, I'm not going to count holidays. I'm not going to count sick days. You have infinite days. And I'm interested in results. In return, you must tell me where you are at all times. If you're out of the country, I need to know that. I won't bother you. And so the Japanese, I never knew that they had such a sense of humor. We have cat's birthday, a cat massage, cat getting fingernails trimmed, a dog's birthday, a dog going to see dog's friend, because they said, well, you want everything. And so they have said, they've been very humble. May I take time off? I said, yes. Have you finished that project? And they said, I haven't finished the project, but my computer's with me and I'll be ready to talk to you anytime. And so I have more focused on ownership of the workflows and the product.
I've never heard of unlimited, but
they have never abused it. They have never.
Well, that's the problem. I think I struggle to get my people to take the days off. Like I'm constantly encouraging them. Mental health is very important. Working from home is very stressful. Doing everything through video is very stressful. You've got to think of your mental health, your physical health. You've got to be getting outside of your house. You've got to be walking around, going to the gym, whatever you're doing, and take time off. Take time off and take time off. And they don't take the time off. And so every year, you get 20 extra days every year.
Yes.
So they've always got about 37 days because they've not used 2 years of leave, and it only builds up to 2 years, and that's it. It caps out, right? So it's like, take the time off. And actually I thought, maybe because they're worried about sick leave, So I brought in an extra 5 days of sick leave, just purely for sick leave. And then maybe that'll encourage them to take some more recreational time off. No. So I find it very hard to get them to take the time off. So, you're interested about unlimited. I could probably say it's unlimited too, but I'm not sure they'd actually take the time off. So sort of
somebody's married to a chonan. So you being a scholar of Japan, you know that the oldest son has responsibilities for his parents, which means the wife of the oldest son really has that. And Masayo is married to a chonan.
Right.
And so she was explaining why she had the misfortune to take off 3 days. And I said, that's great. What are you doing? And she said, we're going to take a nice trip down to Takamatsu because that's where his family's from.
Right.
And we like to go down there. We're buying a car in Tokyo and leaving it down there because they don't drive.
Right.
And so we're going to have a car ready.
Right.
And so there was the whole very cute process in her 50s, getting a driver's license.
Oh, okay.
And buying a car and then driving down to in Shikoku, taking time to do that. And she felt so guilty, and so we got lovely Sanuki udon and the oranges of Takamatsu and stuff, that just to show that I had been there and things. I may misunderstand it. There's lots I misunderstand about Japan, but I think that they take pride in the company, being part of the company, and making it run. I think that Masayo has... The office really flipped on March 23rd, 2020, when the government postponed the Olympics. They were very suspicious. What do they know that we don't know? And they were very suspicious. And before, as I would take days off, they would never take time off. They would never be work remote. We always had Microsoft Teams. We always had that, and we had never used it. And she likes it they like it a whole lot. And so we've gone almost entirely remote. Of course, there's stuff to do with seals and things.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So, what are any other things I should have asked you about leadership that we haven't covered?
Japan changes in a dime. It changes just like that.
That's interesting, because not many people I've heard would refer to change here being that quick. So what are you thinking of?
So I'm thinking of being here in the 1980s, and then from 92 to 2004, we came back a lot for family reasons. We were here several times a year from Hong Kong. And in 92, they said, the bubble days are over. And by the time we got back full-time in 2004, the bubble days nobody mourns the bubble days anymore, because only a very thin part of Japan, a very narrow part, if you owned stocks or real estate before the bubble, you benefited. But most of Japan didn't. And they see it as driving inequality. I think that startups are now acceptable places to work. Crypto is now acceptable places to work. The change happens very, very quickly. It might take a long time to start, but then the next day it'll be. So I think that there's a lot of change. In the 1980s, many people would take a scholarship offered by their employer to go to Harvard Law School or University of Chicago Business School. And one of the trends right now is that most people look at the world and they think, Japan's a pretty good place. I don't want to go overseas. Japan's curiously just the wrong size for internationalization. If you're in the Philippines or Korea or Taiwan, speaking English is a real benefit to you. But if you're in Japan, you can have a modest and okay career without speaking English and maybe never go overseas. It's just a...
The irony there, though, is that the business Japan Inc. wants to and has to go overseas because of declining population, declining markets here. Yet the youth, don't want to go overseas. So, it's like, like when I came here, it was Coxsacre, internationalisation.
Yes.
Now, then it was global car. Well, you don't hear much about global car anymore, globalisation. Because for this reason, people say, well, actually, you know what? The food's great here, no guns, no drugs, no crime particularly. They see it as a monoculture. You can argue about that, but pretty much it's a monoculture statistically. Pretty good place to be. And so, I'll stay in Japan. So I find that interesting, that the Japan Inc. wants them to be more international, speak English, be able to deal with the world because that's where they've got to go. But the young people are like, no, I'm staying here. So interesting.
So the Japanese word nikushoku and sashoku, the meat eaters and the grass eaters. And you probably know that 40% of college graduates don't have any sexual experience. And so the people in their 60s and 70s are probably the most interesting. And they have high pensions. They have defined benefit pensions. And they're really Genki. They are really interested. I think that somebody new coming here to lead a team might find some great people in their 60s and 70s who are great salespeople, who are a part of the building of Japan. And whereas you might think you need young people to build a business, there's some wonderful, we talk about brownfield or greenfield, grayfield, you and me, our generation are some wonderful people here in Japan, which are just waiting to be tapped, and they speak English. One of the interesting points I find, which my wife, who speaks good English, and I cannot get over, Fulbright, which is a joint U.S. and Japanese government program, 80% of the applicants are women. And I think that for women, it's not as enjoyable as it possibly is for men. And so women see internationalization, international education as a positive for them. And again, I think that if you're looking for innovation, often it comes from women in Japan.
Is that also a linguistic thing? Because generally speaking, women tend to be more enthusiastic about becoming better in English, studying foreign languages, and things like Fulbright have got a fairly high cut-off rate for linguistic skills in English. So is that a sort of self-selecting mechanism, do you think?
I think that's possibly it. One of the things which I find very amusing has been the emergence of ESG.
Right.
And ESG has always been important to me. I was an environmentalist since I could remember, to the point that when we got married, my father-in-law and I were selecting the date, and I was delighted that Taiyan fell on Earth Day. We were married on Earth Day.
Earth Day.
And
Very
so
good.
It's been fascinating to see stewardship and ESG.
Yep.
80% of the leaders in that globally are women.
Yeah.
And now all these men are piling into it because it's so trendy. It's probably the hottest investment trend right now.
Right.
In stewardship, corporate governance, activism, active investment management, and women are holding their own because they had first mover advantage. It was seen as something that the men weren't that interested in, and women naturally went to. It was more of a soft skills, people skills, a qualitative analysis.
So if we're going to give some advice to someone who's either just arrived or is going to be sent to Japan, okay, go to Japan, fix it is often a common command, as you mentioned before. But they've got to produce results here, and they don't know Japan. They don't speak the language. What would be some advice you'd have for them?
Be very careful to work long hours yourself in the office. If you are coming in, you will probably not speak Japanese. You will probably have a handler, typically an executive secretary or an executive assistant. In Japan, they are trained to leave the office after you. But you will stress them out and maybe cause them to quit or leave your section if you stay long. So take your work home.
Okay. Right.
Don't do that. I had the experience as a young banker in Hong Kong of being instructed to get some coaching because 4 secretaries quit on me during the year. And it wasn't because I was a shouter or because I worked, the common complaint was I worked too long.
Okay.
And one secretary felt she'd lost her face because I was dealing with people overseas in London and then Los Angeles, and it got to be 2 o'clock in the morning, and I just said, no, drop it, and just worked all the way through. I worked 36 hours and to get something done, and she had left and come in the next morning, and she'd lost her face because her boss had been there. Right. And that's very Asian, but I think it's particularly Japanese. The other thing that I mentioned is Japanese are not aliens, but they are very status conscious. And you have to be, they want to make sure they're in the right group. And in business, if you bring some investors in, they would be flattered to be dealing with CalPERS or dealing with Texas teachers. And they think that we're at that level. In terms of your team, don't assume that people will mix automatically. In particular, if someone's uneducated or a bit uncouth, or maybe has a toothpick, or maybe has a punch perm, or is not as educated as the self-image of the people on your team, they will think that you're looking down at them if you force people to work together. Right. So maybe take time to know people's educational backgrounds, know whether people are from Tokyo or not. That's a big driver. See if you can find that out.
Okay.
I think that secretaries can be allies. They can also be spies for other people. So you have to be very, very careful about how much you share about your plans for the company until you know better.
They're spies for other people. Is this the new boss is going to be here for 3 years? We're going to resist the changes, have an underground movement against it. The secretary is the mole inside the president's office telling us what's coming down the pike so we can cut it off at the pass. Stop this crazy gaijin from ruining the business relationships, ruining the client trust, and keep the company going, because we actually are the people who are running this thing, not them. Is that what you're talking about?
That's part of what I'm talking about. I think that one of the things that is very important to understand in Japan is the word senior in English means something different to Japanese people. It means age. And I remember once at Drexel Burnham asking to see the senior person, and I was taken into a back cubbyhole, and I was taken to see the oldest person in the office, who happened to be a translator. And I wanted to see the branch manager.
Yes.
And it was rather embarrassing because the man behind me who I was taking around was Henry Kravis.
Right.
And I was detailed to take care. I was detailed to be his bag carrier. Drexel, it was a Drexel client. And so senior generally means age.
Yep.
So you might want to think about highest ranking.
Yes.
Or who is the boss here.
Yes.
And this gets into issues if the leader who comes in is younger than some of the people who report to him. You have to work very, very hard.
Yes.
To praise them,
yes.
To say honest things about how you can learn from them.
Yep.
You're looking at them as the wise person on the team.
Yep.
You're looking at them to show the mature leadership, and you can bond with them. But to acknowledge your youth to an older person who reports to you can be very much a force multiplier for your success. And being aware of people's ages, because the Japanese all are.
Yes, they know it down to a fine point, don't they? Any final advice, Frank?
Don't forget to laugh. Japanese.
Don't forget to laugh, okay.
Don't forget to have moments of joy. They can be sometimes at a baseball game, or don't forget to be human. The Japanese have a great sense of smell for weakness, or a smell for inauthenticity.
Right.
And show them yourself.
Be vulnerable, you're saying, or just be authentic?
Be vulnerable, be authentic. It's really tough. My partner is a professional woman, and she's not having a good time here. Are there any things that ladies like to do in Japan that maybe your wife enjoys, that my wife might enjoy? Or leave things that, if they want to, they can hook up. Maybe somebody will say, my wife speaks English, she'd love to practice her English. But showing vulnerability, that you're not perfect and you don't have all the answers, and sometimes life is tough for you too.
Well, it's certainly tough at the moment with COVID, but thank you for joining me, Frank. We're at this major separation of distance here for safety, so it's going to be quite interesting how these videos over the years, you'll see we're sitting very snug, and now we're sitting a long way away. I look forward to the day when my guests will be sitting snug again, because it'll be safe enough to do it. But thank you for taking your time to join me.
Thank you very much for your interest.
That. There you go, another fascinating journey through Japan Inc., across different cultures, different time zones, and different business experience with Frank Packard. And we really thank Frank for joining us. And join us again for the next episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews.